My name's Kate Worthington. I am a director of Raw Adventures with my husband Ross. As well as the work that I do with the business, I still really love to be in the hills for my own sort of personal enjoyment. I like walking. I've always liked walking since I was a kid, walking in the hills. And probably from my 20s onwards, started to enjoy running in initially kind of, well, anywhere where I lived really. I would kind of use running as a way to kind of get out, keep active, keep fit. And then when we moved to North Wales in 2010, that interest in running just sort of extended, and I found myself running in the hills more and more just because of the landscape that we live in. I suppose before that I'd enjoyed running in the lakes, in trails, in woodland. Yeah, wherever I've lived in my adult life, I guess. Based on, I suppose, being quite happy and comfortable in the hills and enjoying kind of journeys in the hills, I suppose my interest in running takes me on journeys. That's what I like the most. I like racing, I like running, but if I can incorporate into a longer journey, then I do. Back in 2018, a longer distance path was created by Aled Owen called the Snowdonia Slate Trail, and it's about 83 miles long, and it links a series of sort of valleys and communities that all have a connection with the slate industry. Either there were working quarries or there were communities where people who worked in the quarries were living. But it weaves like a really nice route sort of through the landscape, up and over valleys, upland terrain, river systems, woodland. And it kind of shows off a lot of the different environments and landscapes of this sort of northern area of Eryri. So my husband and I were interested in walking around it, and we had some time available to us in April 2018, and we just sort of took 3 days out and walked our way around the trail, and that was really fun. Probably did about 30 odd miles each day, and definitely could have taken longer to do it, but I think we only had like 3 days of childcare. And ever since then in 2018, I was keen to maybe give it a go to run round it. And I do remember setting off in 2020, summer of 2020, I decided to kind of give it a go, but then I sprained my ankle, maybe like an hour and a half into the journey. So that put paid to that. And for various reasons, I didn't come back to the idea practically, not until recently. So it was sort of last year that I started to conceive that I might enjoy running around it in one go. So I put that back on my radar from a planning sort of training point of view, and I chose a time in February to do it because that was a time that seemed to be quite kind of free in the calendar and quite a nice time of year, as in the trail is free of sort of bracken that can start growing up in sort of late spring into summer months. There's quite a few areas where there's a lot of ticks, I remember, in the summer months. So in February, the vegetation's really low and the weather, cool, but potentially get some nice days in February. So that was my thinking. So I decided to kind of put it on my radar and try and complete the 83 miles for myself. But then I started to look a little bit more into it, and I could see that based on records that are kept by the fastest known time website, for example, there hadn't been a record of someone completing the trail in a kind of unsupported style on their own, which meant that, someone would go out without any sort of external support from, someone meeting them to give them extra supplies, etc. So that seemed quite exciting. And then I thought, I wonder if I could complete it in that style, and then that might gain a fastest known time in that sense. And it was kind of a bit of an exciting adventure to see if I could complete. So on the 18th of February, I did set out, and everything kind of went to my plan, and I was able to complete that round. So it was about 83 miles. So just over like 4,200 metres of ascent. And I kind of managed to get in just before sort of a 24-hour time. 23 hours and 39 minutes to be precise. Well, I think a lot of preparation and training must come from just the general level of sort of experience and training that I've got under my belt. I'm 47. I've been used to being on my feet for long periods of time, given the work that I've got myself involved in with my mountain leader qualifications, over the decades. So I guess the certain amount of resilience and capacity and stamina has built up sort of naturally in that sense. But then I definitely have worked some specific training on top of that in terms of sort of my strength and conditioning work to keep my body strong and able to sort of tolerate higher loads. But having said that, I don't run a high amount of mileage each week, but I think I just try and maintain a consistency of activity. And then a lot of the outcome comes down to other skills that I've amassed over time, which are specific to running skills, but also managing my nutrition, managing myself in the landscape, being efficient with sort of kit and movement skills over all sorts of terrain, keeping up your average pace over various terrain, navigating, and then having a mental capacity just to deal with issues and challenges as they arise. I was very fortunate in that the little weather window that I was looking at for this week in February was looking pretty good. And it stayed looking pretty good. So there was a couple of days in the week of February that I was looking at, which was like the week commencing the 17th of February, I think, yeah. So I had good weather on my side, and I wouldn't have set out with a really poor forecast. So I was hedging my bets and looking at the forecast. So everything was all going in my favour that day. So that was great. But it doesn't mean to say that everything was all super simple and super easy. Although I think I had the best day for it to give myself the best chance of completion. There were definitely moments where my energy was low, and I think that's to do with nutrition, just the general output over so many hours without really much stopping. So probably the longest stop I took was probably about 15 minutes in Kriti, where I sort of changed food and things in my pack and messed about with where things were and got a few things ready for the incoming overnight section again, where I knew it was going to get dark. So I took that opportunity to sort out layers and get my head torch ready again and change battery. And that took about 15 minutes. But other than that, all my stops were quite short and sweet. I just did everything on the move, really. But I do remember coming over, it was this section here, so Borchigreus, and descending down to Llanberis, and the trail come through Llanberis and then up through the Norwig and then over that way towards Mynyslandergai and then down to Bethesda. And it was dark by this point. It was probably about maybe 11 o'clock. So I'd been going for about 19, 20 hours, but I knew that section was going to take me another probably 3.5 to 4 hours to get to the end. And I definitely felt like, oh man, I've got another 4 hours. And at that point, it felt like a really long time. Everything else had been going along quite nicely, but that 4 hours felt like, oh no, it's going to be a really long 4 hours. So that was probably the lowest point. And I did catch myself thinking, oh, I could stop now. I could just stop, and maybe that would be enough. And I'd be proud of what I'd done, and I'd done a long way. And then I was like, but that's not all of it, is it? You wouldn't have finished it. And you did come here to finish it. So there's nothing actually wrong with you. You're not carrying an injury. You're just feeling a bit because you probably need some more food. So why don't you eat some more food and get up that hill? So I ate some more food and then I felt better. I actually ate a Velo Forte soft chew packet. It was overcomable. It wasn't a deal breaker, but I just noticed that low mood. Probably just managing the consistency of training and balancing that with work, activity levels, and managing a training load that suits me, but that doesn't put me into overdrive or ask of my body too much, because then I can flip into maybe overuse injuries, which has happened year on year. So prior to running this in February, I have enjoyed longer runs and longer races, but then I did go through a period of inactivity while I was dealing with a diagnosis of an autoimmune disease called axial spondyloarthritis, AXPAR, which is easier to say. So that is an immune-driven arthritis, which for me initially manifested itself in my sacroiliac joint, in my hip. And it was interesting that period of time, that was sort of back end of 2021 into 22, when that was diagnosed, because it started to make sense of inflammatory injuries that I'd been dealing with, that I just thought were to do with overcooking it, doing too much running, too much walking. But it might well have been my immune system overreacting, and the inflammatory response in my tendons were getting a bit out of control. So come June 2022, I was fortunate enough to be put onto some biological therapy medication, which I inject every couple of weeks, and that tempers my immune system from kind of overreacting. So that's enabled me to tolerate a load of sort of training and activity again, but it probably took about a year or so just to come out what that balance needed to suit my body. So it was by the back end of 2024, I felt like I was starting to get that right, and I kind of put a couple of races into my training calendar. So I ran the Firelighter race on Anglesey, which is sort of 35-mile race, really lovely around the Anglesey Coast Path. So that was the first race I'd done, well, probably since the Dragon's Back race in 2021. Oh, no, having said that, I've done a couple of local fell races as sort of test races. But that was, 35 miles was the longer race. And then also end of September last year, I ran in the Seven Valleys Ultra up in the Lake District, and that was a really nice test. I was really pleased with that. I kind of top 10, like 7th in the Firelighter race. I came in like 5th, and I was really pleased that my training was starting to work, and I was feeling more confident in my body again, which was nice, because I suppose given the fact that for the last 20 years I've been relying on my body to perform for the work I do as a mountain leader, and it wasn't performing like I wanted it to perform. Well, I sound like an engine of an old car. Kind of knocked my confidence quite a bit, because you kind of take body for granted, especially when you're using it in a role where you are physically out in the hills looking after others. I felt curtailed, that I wasn't in a place where I could rely on my body in a role that I was also then managing and responsible for other people. So that I found that quite challenging for a while. So the Slate Trail became a bit of a personal test of all of that coming together. So actually I feel like the real win is the fact that I put it on my radar to start with. That to me mentally meant it felt like I was ready to give something a go again, whereas for a good year and a half I was nervous. But it's been a really nice project to see to its fruition, and I wasn't wholly sure if I would finish it, although given the planning that I'd done and what I knew about myself and knew about the trail and know about my skills, if everything goes right, then in theory I should be able to finish it. It will be something that crops up, digestion issues, or if I trip and fall on my face or injure myself, that might stop me in my tracks. But if I can just keep everything at status quo and just keep moving, in theory I should be able to finish it. I just wasn't quite sure what time it might take. In my head, I thought it'd be really neat to be able to do it within a 24-hour period. And I worked out mathematically that would be possible if I could keep to an average of 3.5 to 4 miles an hour. So mathematically on paper, that's kind of what I'd needed to move at in order to finish the route within sort of 24 hours. The route's got quite a lot of ascent, and the way that I went round the trail, which is kind of clockwise, it means that most of the ascent is actually in the last third of the route. And there's pros and cons of following the trail clockwise or anti-clockwise, depending on which way you want to see things or experience views and the route. So I pondered on whether I could do it within 24 hours, although that wasn't really the goal. The goal was to finish. And then when I started moving and sort of thinking about the maths, I was like, well, if I keep moving at this sort of pace, then in theory I should be able to get in within 24 hours It might be 23 hours and 52 minutes, but it might be quite close. It would be really annoying if it was 24 hours and 3 minutes. So I worked out where I wanted to be at certain times in the day, and that was based on an average of 3.8 miles an hour or something, which on paper is a really steady pace, but over the course of a day, it's sort of trying to keep up that pace after hour, which was the key. So I just sort of worked backwards where I wanted to be halfway, where I wanted to be 3 o'clock in the afternoon, where I wanted to be at 8 o'clock in the evening, and they all seem to work. So I suppose that's also a skill in terms of planning and measuring distance and terrain and how fast things would take me. And I was pleased I probably got to Bethesda and was like, I think if I could keep moving, I'll definitely get in within 24 hours. And then that was sort of quite a motivator, and I just kept running to Bangor because I definitely wanted to get in before 24 hours at that point. I think there's a lot to be said about being flexible in your mind and actually trying to remove yourself from a lot of noise about expectation or what you feel like you're supposed to be able to do, or what you think you're expected to be able to do, or what others might think of you. So I think I had to do quite a bit of removing from myself, as in what I was expecting myself to be able to do, either compared to a younger version of me, a different version of me, or other people, or what I thought people's perception of me might be. I had to remove all that and just find a goal that was completely personal to me, that didn't really have to fit into, it's this particular race, or it's this particular thing that loads of other people do. And so finding a goal that is sort of personal to me, that I can define and wrangle without too much sort of noise. And rather than putting myself against certain expectations that are quite fixed, it's sort of trying to change a goal to fit me and what I enjoy and what suits my body and my brain, to not get too stressed about something, too fearful about something, or fearful of failing. Or I just kind of wanted to quietly get on and do something for myself, which might then buoy my confidence again for doing things in another context, be that another race maybe. Or I definitely find I was nervous about getting out onto the trail. I think it's like nervous excitement, but not in the same way as I feel those nerves before a race, a more sort of public-facing race with lots of other people around and a kind of self-imposed expectation or competitiveness that wells up, which can be sort of quite motivating and quite exciting, but if you're in the wrong frame of mind, it can also be quite a bit off-putting and a bit much, actually. And the next thing I do might be another race, and I'll enjoy it for all different reasons. But a quiet solo go around the Slate Trail was something that really fitted my psyche, I think, at the time. Yeah, the idea of putting something on my radar that was actually quite personal and it didn't really impact on anyone else. And that's the whole nature of doing something completely unsupported. As much as I obviously shoehorned the adventure into a specific week in February because it suited us in terms of where I was at, where Ross was at, where Libby was at, who was where. It was sort of a quiet week at home. No one was off away for work, etc. So logistically, it could happen. Even down to, is Ross around? Yes, he can take me and drop me off in Bethesda. All those little logistics. But the fact of doing it unsupported, I didn't have to rely on organising someone to meet me during the day. I could just go off and have my own day out. And I suppose that kind of helped to quieten the narrative in my head about, but what if you start and then you don't finish it? Well, that may well happen. So it's kind of trying to develop a strategy in my head of, well, how will I feel? Let's work out how I'm going to feel if that happens, and already work that outcome and play that outcome out in my head and work out how that might make me feel. And I would feel disappointed, but I guess because I hadn't really announced it to the whole world that I was doing it, I'd only have to deal with that little personal disappointment myself. I wouldn't have to deal with it in relation to the fact that I'd started off on a race with other people around and in a more sort of public arena, in a more overt framework. I could just quietly walk home and go, oh, well, that didn't work out, and deal with the outcome myself. And I suppose that's why purposely I put something on my radar that just affected me, really, whether I'd finished it or not. I didn't pay for an entry for a race. I didn't travel across the UK to stay somewhere for a weekend and get all my kit ready for registration and be at the start line at 6 o'clock in the morning and have all of that. Nope, it's just me then. So I'd already sort of worked out that it wouldn't be the end of the world if I didn't complete it. So that's cool, so I can just take that pressure off. Ultimately, it's not the end of the world if you don't complete anything, is it? Jeez. But as runners, why else do we enter races? It's because we like to test ourselves from a physical, competitive point of view, whether that's competitive with others in your field or yourself, as well as lots of other reasons why we enter into races. But this wasn't a race. It wasn't even an event. It was just me and a lovely route in North West Wales.
Nanny face.
When we walked it for that first time, because it was through areas that we'd never seen before, and it was areas we wouldn't normally have visited. Being all mountainy focused, you come into Eryri and you forget that it is more than just the lumpy bits on top that we can see all around us, that it's a landscape and population that's got quite an intertwined heritage. So it gave me maybe a little bit more of an insight into North Wales as a whole, and a really enjoyable time to hang out with Kate and go on our own little adventure. I remember us finding and discovering the gorge beneath Llanfestiniog, which is like I believe is the only naturally occurring rainforest in the UK. And then the bilberry forests were pretty cool. Just after that was a big woodland area that's owned by the National Park that was full of bilberries. And a few minor navigational mishaps. Only minor ones, mind. Happens to the best of us. And just seeing that this is a chance to view the area and not be on the mountains and see the mountains and appreciate them from different angles. And equally, it was just as fun to do that a couple of years later with some clients when we ran the Slate Trail over 3 days. It was a marathon distance every day. It was not all hardcore running every day. We took it nice and easy. We stopped at cafes. We enjoyed some nice tea and cakes and enjoyed the views again. The weather was pretty reasonable to us. And again, the fact that we were viewing it from a different context, we were able to move quite light and fast, relatively, compared to slogging it out with a big old backpack. I'm in absolute awe of what Kate did on the Slate Trail. I think it's great, and hopefully more people will discover the route as the years come by. Over 7 days, 5 days, or try and run it under 24 hours, if you can think you can beat her. The Slate Trail, it would be a fantastic opportunity to do it for a corporate or a charity challenge event, multiple teams working maybe over a 24-hour period, dedicating their team to a section of the route and passing it like a baton event. That could work pretty well. A multi-day challenge is an alternative to, we don't have to fly overseas to do things. We've got some amazing long distance journeys here in the UK, haven't we? And this is one that is less travelled. This would be the equivalent, if everyone does the West Highland Way, which is like base camp, this would be the equivalent of doing like Annapurna circuit. So the slightly more refined and less travelled route that people wouldn't have heard on, but it gives you better kudos points in the pub, I reckon, anyway, if you go to the pub or around the corporate table, however you want to do it. So I think that would be a really good opportunity for people to come out, take on a different adventure, see a different aspect of Eryri and spend some time together in some really varied terrain and some cracking cake. So although there is not a dedicated entire route that incorporates the Slate Trail in Kate's 15 walks on Rwyddfa or around Rwyddfa, you definitely get to see sections of it. If you're not sharing a few short sections of the trail, you'll be in the similar vicinity. So that's just a blatant plug. As you say, available in all good bookshops and occasionally a few bad ones as well. And you can put a link to the guidebook in the description, which is apparently I have to point down there.